Greetings and felicitations to you. Thank you for watching the 7th video, and I would like to dedicate this video to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. As you have probably already surmised, this video is going to be on the genealogical argument created by Westcott and Hort in their book, The Introduction to the Greek New Testament, page 41 and following. Here's a flash of Westcott and Hort's definition of genealogy. Genealogy, we understand it today as something like this. We have the original texts, and then we have the Byzantine, the Western, the Caesarean, the Alexandrian. We have these different text types. From the originals, all right, a man, Lucian of Antioch, and it's often referred to as the Lucian recension, came about in the 5th, 6th century, created a text, and that's where the Byzantine manuscripts came from. And then there was a man, according to this theory, Hezekiah of Alexandria, who created a text in the 3rd century, or the 4th century, and that's the text that the Alexandrians used. And so there were these two competing texts. Eventually the Byzantine text won out because it's the majority text, and according to Dr. Wyatt, the Arab invasion and things like that. So you have this one originals, we have the originals, and then we have all these, and that's what they call the genealogical. It's genealogical because it's families. There's the Byzantine family, the Alexandrian, the Western, all these different families. But scholars have been seeing from the beginning that it doesn't follow. There is no manuscript. There is no one Greek manuscript, whether in Westcott and Hort's day or today, that verifies this theory of the text types found in the genealogical argument. It was such the case that Westcott and Hort did not even use one example from their collection of Greek texts that they had at that time that proved the genealogical argument. They had to create their own text. They had to create a fantasy text, a text that does not exist anywhere. And even today, with our 5,000 manuscripts, there's no text that proves the genealogical argument. Here's the way that Westcott and Hort argued. I'm quoting from their book, and I'm going to flash it right now. The argument that they're using, it has no basis in fact. It has no basis in the manuscript evidence. And it has no basis in the history. They took Lucian because of probably some reference that Jerome made concerning it. But where they got Hezekiah's from, nobody knows. I mean, we saw in the previous video that the Sinaiticus text came from Origen's library. It didn't come from Hezekiah's. But anyway, I mean, there's no factual basis upon which to use the genealogical argument, which has brought some, like Dean John Bergen and F.H.A. Scrivener and all of these men, to suppose that the genealogical argument was created just to destroy the Textus Receptus. And again, they say, well, if this is a weapon, then it was never used. And you know, the Textus Receptus, therefore, is just as valid today as it was back then, as well as a century ago, or 2 centuries prior, or 4 centuries prior. You have to debunk the Textus Receptus on other grounds other than a false philosophy that was never used, the genealogical argument. So what do we have today? We have what scholars are calling mixture, and it goes like this. We have the original texts, and then we have a tree that follows, which are all the copies. Whether you're talking about Alexandrian copies or Byzantine copies, you find all the copies in this one tree. And from this tree, you use a philosophy, a text-critical philosophy, to determine what the originals said. Now, Dr. White is correct in saying that the Textus Receptus, you can't find a Greek manuscript that follows completely and exactly what the Textus Receptus says. This is because they collated the text. They took the several Greek manuscripts that they had today, they took the readings from the fathers, which secondary sources, and other sources such as the Latin Vulgate or the Greek Orthodox text, if it was available. And they used all of these to create the Textus Receptus. So there's no one Greek manuscript that follows this. And that is very true. Dr. White is correct in saying that. It was done by a critical evaluation of the texts that were given to the church at hand by the providence of God, and they created this text. And from this text, the translations such as the King James and the Dutch and the German and the French and the Spanish and the Italian all came out of this text, the translations, and the King James, of course. In the 18th century, because of the more greater manuscripts, they came up with another philosophy, which is what we're investigating. And that philosophy created this text. And this text, the critical text, is also a collation of several Greek manuscripts. Not one Greek manuscript matches the critical text completely. This text is a collation. It's a collation of the Sinaiticus, the Alexandrian, and all the Alexandrians. They even used Byzantine readings in this as well. Right? They didn't use it. They didn't take the Byzantine as the authoritative. They took it as a secondary source. And when the Byzantine conflicted with the Alexandrian, then they threw out the Byzantine. They kept the Alexandrian. And sometimes they took the Byzantine. So they call it an eclectic text for that reason. But it's an eclectic text based on two manuscripts, really, on the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus, as well as a few others that they put into the text type called the Alexandrian manuscripts. So both of these texts, the Textus Receptus and the critical text, are collations of Greek manuscripts, collations of this one tree that they find. And the Textus Receptus men are saying, well, we think that these readings are more authoritative than those readings, and these are our reasons. And the critical texts are saying, well, we think these readings are more authoritative than those readings, and therefore this is what we create. You can create these two texts from this one, from the originals, coming from all the copies that we have today. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a philosophy that brought about the critical text that is not based on any fact, it's not based on scripture, it's not based on history, it's based on a scientific theory that was created in the 19th century. And that 19th century theory is rationalistic and naturalistic in nature. So I'm at an impasse. We have proven that the theory used by the critical text men, that the older texts are more authoritative, is not true. We have shown that the conflation theory is not true. We have shown that the genealogical argument is not true either. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to quote several scholars on both sides of the issue showing that the critical text theory concerning genealogy is not correct. So let's take a look. Brothers and sisters, I mean, no disrespect, but this idea of the critical text concerning genealogy having never been used by Westcott and Hort, having been refuted by Dean Bergen, by Scrivener, by Hoskier, by many men, and also being refuted by their own people sympathetic to the critical text, are saying that the genealogical argument does not fit the Greek text. These different trees, if you want to put it that way, don't work with the manuscripts. All we have is this one tree with the originals and then all of the copies that we find afterwards. That's what we find. This is so evident that even Dr. White, in his book, the King James only controversy on page 71 will say that scholars are disputing this idea of text types, but he is going to retain these words, the Byzantine, Alexandrian, because they're in the popular literature and because essentially the big King James onlyists are using it. But the King James onlyists are using it because the scholars, Westcott and Hort and them, are the ones who originated it. So you can't blame the King James onlyists for mistakes made by Westcott and Hort and by those who follow them in the critical text views. Now, just one last point. When we take a look at these text types, and you take a look, for instance, at the apparatus of the critical text here, what you're going to find, what you're not going to find, is a symbol for the Alexandrian manuscripts. Now, this is Nestle-Aland 27. There is no symbol in Nestle-Aland for the Alexandrian manuscripts. The manuscripts are listed separately. And this is because the manuscripts themselves defy the very category that they're put in. There are Byzantine readings, there are Western readings, there are Caesarean readings in all of the Alexandrian manuscripts. And this, again, is mixture. And so it defies the understanding of the scholars to put a letter or a symbol for all of the Alexandrian manuscripts under one roof, because they disagree so much to get with each other. I believe it was Hoskier who found 3,000 differences between the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus in the Gospels alone. How can you put them both in the same category when they are so different from each other? The Sinaiticus text, which we've talked about in the previous video, the first 8 chapters of the book of John are Western in nature, or at least this is how they're identifying them. I don't know how they're doing it if they can't make an argument for the different text types themselves. So what we're having is all the manuscripts in one tree, and this is how I understand it. There are a philosophy that says we'll take this manuscript, and we create the critical text. And then there's the philosophy that used manuscripts at the time of the Reformation, as well as the knowledge that was accrued that the church got during that time, and they made the Textus Receptus. Right? This was done through the providence of God. This was done by the philosophy of man. Now, they could argue, and Dr. White argues a certain providential aspect concerning this, but if there are 8,000 differences, if there are 14,000 differences, if there's a 1 in 10 difference in words, when it comes to this and the Textus Receptus, then what are you saying? We didn't have a Bible before the 1800s? This text was completely and sloppily copied? And that the Puritans and Calvin and John Gill, the godly Baptists who created the Southern Baptist Convention, who used the King James Version and the Textus Receptus, and the Puritans and the Covenanters and all of these men were wrong and had a faulty text. 1 in 10. So there it is. My time is finished. I'd like to thank you very much for watching this video, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask. May God bless you, and this video is for Christ and Christ alone.